Hello, Genevieve. We cannot hear you. You are still connecting.
Is that?
Okay. Yes, you can start.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm very happy to have you all here, and you are very numerous. We know that more than 550 participants have signed up for this webinar. I'm very happy to have you here for the book launch, The European Energy Transition, an Agenda for the 20s. And what we want to do in these 2 hours until 4 CET is to discuss with you what is the impact, to start with that, of the current crisis, COVID, that comes unexpected on a Green Deal that was launched last year as a very promising step by the incoming von der Leyen Commission. Jean-Michel Glachon, my dear friend, and Klaus-Dieter Borchardt, Christian Singlersen, Geneviève Pons, Peter Wiss, and Georg Zachmann are going to respond to this in a first panel. We have a second panel that is led by Michael Walsh, the Managing Director of Smart Wires, and that is going to introduce us to the question on technology uptake in power networks. And in the end, Philip Lowe will tell us what is the win-win that we could identify as a result of the Brexit negotiations that are going on. One second. When I look now, why did we do this book? So when I look at this picture, you see that is the trajectory of decreasing emissions as it was foreseen by the ambitious clean energy package and the long-term strategy. But you see that the big effort is needed after 2030. What if an economic crisis prevents us from doing it? We will not make it for the well below 2 degree in line with COP21. Here, the ambition to raise it to 50 or 55% will give us a much more linear trajectory. Next slide. And here you see the ambitious Green Deal as it was conceived last year. You see that it is an overarching framework. Our representatives from ASA and the European Commission will elaborate further where we are on this, but we see it encompasses from an offshore communication to a circular economy, a farm to fork strategy, everything that suggests us as well that in the end of this decade, we will see energy in a much more integrated manner than it is today. It will link with gas, it will link with the digitalization, and it will link indeed also with transport, heating, and cooling. Next slide. So here you see our book, and it's also a little gift from the editor for those that attend today's event. You shall get the book at a better discount, and also a free copy of the European Energy Journal and subscription offer to this European Energy Journal. Next slide, please. Daniela?
Yes, so thank you, Suzanne, and hello everyone joining us, also to our audience on YouTube. First of all, I welcome you to live tweet using this hashtag and interacting with us. Of course, you can also ask questions here to our panelists. And with the book, it comes the online course. So I just a quick overview on the course. You will have the opportunity to get this book for free and also interact with some of the authors of the book. And another course I would like to mention to you is the evolution of electricity markets in Europe, starting in September, where you will have an overview of the implementation of the electricity network codes and the EU Clean Energy Package. So check out our website and all the online courses that we have available. Just also to let you know that we currently have 2 scholarships available, one on digital solidarity, where we offer 50 free seats for professionals and students affected by the COVID-19 deadline, the 15th of September, and another scholarship on Lights on Women, where we offer 4 scholarships to the FSR online courses to women pioneering innovative energy. So check our website for everything and contact me if you have any questions. So back to you, Suzanne.
Thank you very much. And of course, we want to have you interacting with us during these 2 hours. The first thing is we want to do a poll and ask you questions on a very current thing. But also during the discussion, you can always ask a question via chat. The moderators are going to see it and we are going to respond to the questions. So the first question on the poll here is, will the corona pandemic dominate the agenda in the 20s in such a way that the Green Deal is not a priority anymore? Please choose yes or no.
Okay, many people voting. I will end now and share the results.
Okay, so we see here that the answer is no. That means you do not believe that it's gonna dismiss the Green Deal as a priority, but it is it's a small difference, we could say. We have 45% that believe yes, it's gonna change it. So that's a bit alarming, I guess, and I'm sure that Jean-Michel and the next panel are going to take this up. But we have a second question for you as well. Will the financial needs related to the corona pandemic diminish the effectiveness of the Green Deal? Please vote yes or no.
Okay, get your votes. I'm going to close the poll and share the results.
Okay, so that's interesting. So here a majority is saying that yes. So the financial situation for the Green Deal, we could imagine here the Just Transition Fund with the 100 millions could be impacted, will be impacted according to you. And here it's a big majority believing yes, it will be impacted. Okay, and the last question. So here it's multiple choice. The corona pandemic requires, first choice, the Green Deal to emphasize the just transition even more. Second, no change from the Green Deal. Third, other adaptations from the Green Deal. Please select your choice.
Okay, you can see the results.
Okay, so we see here that a majority of you believes that we need to emphasize just transition, solidarity even more. And the last one, that also other adaptations are needed, is the second here. No change, no one believes there will be no change. Many thanks for your active participation. And now we want to give you on the menu a first taste of what is in our 604 pages book. Thanks for coming. Jean-Michel, I hand over.
Ladies, gentlemen, good afternoon in the EU, good morning in the US, and good evening in Asia. The poll did tell it all already. Of course, we will keep Green Deal because we have it, because in the EU, we do not use to throw away a policy because of changes. So it will stay, but what will it become? And you are telling by yourself 70% financing will not be the same, will not be there. So a policy with a different financing, I'm sorry to tell you frankly, is not the same policy. It's only the same name, but the policy has changed. And second, you also say it has to be more just. And if it is not more just, it has to change in any other way. So only 7% of you do think that it will be the same policy, in fact. So if it is not the same policy, which one will it be? I do not know. I am even not convinced that it will be a different policy, but maybe the impact will be reduced. We have to discuss it. I have my views. You see at my voice, and I'm director of a school. I would be delighted to tell you what I think, but it's not the point. The point is to discuss with other people. First, we will ask to Klaus-Dieter Borchardt. Klaus-Dieter is currently Deputy Director at DG Energy, European Commission. So he's on the front line. He knows exactly what can come regarding the Green Deal, what can come the Green Deal and the famous recovery plan that the Council is okay, but not okay, but willing to have, but not willing how to get, and the German presidency, because of course we know that Germany is effective and it should be. On the 1st of July, we might have the chance of having both the money and the will and a consequent agenda to work on the Green Deal. After that, we will go to Christian Zingersen. Well, I'm not good with Dutch names, with Dane names, sorry. Christian is a new director at ESSE, the agency for cooperation of European regulators. And Christian will tell us, frankly, I assume, if his work, the work of the agency, is mainly to make things work or to adapt the frame to the new priorities or the new threats. After these two, in their own particularities, leader in European policy or European regulation, we will go to see George Zachman or Georg Zachman, depending the way you want to pronounce it, because Georg did a fantastic paper in the book regarding social justice and climate transition. And we would like to hear from him if the corona crisis in my country, half of the private sector is jobless, including two of my kids. They have no job. They live from the subsidies of the state. We will have to hear from him if this is a big reason to adapt or to change, and to adopt or to change what. And last point, we will have a debate, and you will see it will be a debate. Jeff Pons from the Law Institute, and Peter Wyss. I will not introduce Peter Wyss, you know him. He's an expert on the European climate policy, author of a fantastic reference book. And they will discuss what we can do at the border, because if we push Green Deal in this context of economic crisis, we will need some protection of the border. What kind of? And even we may discuss if the world will be the world of last year, or maybe the world is fundamentally broken between China, EU, and US, and WTO will stay there, but like a kind of empty box. I do not know what they will say, but I will listen, like you, with strong interest. First of the speakers, Klaus Dieter. Klaus Dieter, you have 5 minutes, and my smartphone will tell me the end of your 5 minutes.
Jean-Michel, sorry, because Klaus Dieter is still not with us, so
may we go with Christian Zinglersen. Christian, not always good to speak the first, but we need somebody to start.
Does that mean I get 10 minutes instead of just 5, Jean-Michel? Or
you know that I am French. I am flexible with rules. You have 10 minutes. Go,
no. If Klaus Dieter comes, I would immediately vacate the podium.
Okay, Christian.
Needless to say.
Welcome and
okay.
Go.
Okay. So thank you very much for the invitation. It is the first one at the Florence School with my new hat on as ASA director, following from Alberto's long successful tenure. And I'm very pleased to participate, and I look forward to the second edition, Suzanne, coming out soon. You said, Jean-Michel, are we in the business of making things work and or adapting to change circumstances? That was your suggestion. And I would offer a shorthand version, which I would then try to elaborate on, which is I think we as an agency are there to make things work, and we do so via adapting to changed circumstances. And I'll try to put that into a bit of perspective in the next couple of minutes. So ahead of this call, I would sort of point to two different currents relevant for how we would think about adapting to different circumstances. The first is sort of the Green Deal more broadly, which obviously is a very comprehensive, ambitious policy vision, where my take would be that the higher the decarbonization ambition in a shorter period of time, the higher the premium, at least longer term, on finding relatively cost-efficient solutions. Maybe that is not part of the political conversation every single day, but longer term, I would think that there would be a higher political premium on cost-efficient solutions, the more ambitious one wants to be in a shorter period of time. And I think a significant part of cost-efficient solutions lie within, shall we say, broader, liquid, more integrated markets. In other words, those types of things for which ACER was set up. So that's one current. The other current is the current pandemic, as you rightly put, and what that what questions that gives rise to. And here I would say, you know, not necessarily with my formal director's hat on, but as an interested observer, I think I have seen, as many others, a lot of national reflexes driving a number of different decisions. Obviously in the health area, but I think they are not insignificant in terms of pointing to some fundamental political dynamics and perceptions about political legitimacy, which are relevant for broader developments in Europe. Now, what that brings up, for me at least, is first sort of a couple of questions or a couple of perspectives. The first is, I would think about how power and gas markets have sort of held up in this particular context in Europe. And I guess my initial impression is they've held up pretty well. They have held up pretty well. Arguably, they have not been put under the same type of strain as many other aspects of public life, but they have held up pretty well. So far, so good. The second perspective, which pumps up in my mind, apropos the question that you started off with, Jean-Michel, about making things work via adapting to new circumstances, something which we're working on quite a bit, quite significantly these coming months, is generation adequacy at ACER, and trying to, shall we say, support a more shared, more Europeanized approach to the assessment of generation adequacy in the future. I think that is more important than ever in this current situation we're in, but I would also accept that the context for something like that is changing. I think we, as an agency with many others, will need to work even harder in making decision makers across Europe comfortable that a more, shall we say, shared approach to generation adequacy, a more Europeanized approach to generation adequacy is the right answer for challenges in the future, in the context of this current situation, where we see that, at least in some areas, fundamental perceptions of political legitimacy rest to some degree national, as opposed to European. That would be my starting point, Jean-Michel. I don't know how many of the minutes of mine or Klaus-Dieter's that I have used, but happy to take up a bit more time if you want to ask a follow-up question.
1 minute of yours.
Yes. So what
Do
I would
you
then
see the same gas and electricity? If I can add a question.
I would think that some of the sensitivities that we will need to take account of are probably more predominant in electricity than in gas. And as I said, I think we need to work hard to make sure that decision makers are comfortable that the shared resources model that we will increasingly need to turn to, and which is encapsulated in the clean energy package, meets political acceptability in many different quarters. And I think I would sense that there is a different appreciation of that today than perhaps 2 or 3 years ago.
But Christian, of course, I expect you to work hard. That's the minimum you can do in this crisis. I'm joking. I'm not joking. I'm telling also what I think we are all challenged, and we have to show that we deliver something for the society. So if Klaus-Dieter is there, he is welcome. If he is not, we jump on Georg. Klaus-Dieter?
Still not here.
Alors, hop, we jump on Georg. Georg is a compatriot of Klaus-Dieter, but he's totally independent from official policymaking, like Christian depends of official policymaking. Klaus-Dieter too. Georg is saying what he thinks. So what do you think, Georg? What are the key aspects who can transform the way we think or the way we build the European energy and climate policy?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jean-Michel. Thanks a lot, Susanne, for bringing us all together today. I wanted to share a few thoughts on kind of, will the COVID crisis kill the European Green Deal? So we are supposed to discuss today the European Green Deal. We are all mainly preoccupied currently with the COVID crisis. And I mean, it's only brainstorming and open source because nobody really knows at that stage. But my take would be first of all a relatively political one. So, in my view, the European Green Deal was mainly really a political flagship project. So, the idea of which has been to bring together heads of states and governments to discuss the crucial compromises that are needed for full decarbonization of Europe. And the challenge that we had was in the past decades, we tried it several times with different other flagship projects like the Energy Union, and there was always another crisis that prevented some of the tough compromises to be done. So we had the financial crisis and the migration crisis, now COVID crisis, and they are kind of very, very tough questions that I think cannot be decided on the level of national ministers anymore. So questions on do we want to finance transition in East European countries? So do West European countries want to give money for that? Would we want to have significantly higher carbon prices, and what is the price we want to pay for that? For example, border adjustments. Do we want to have significantly tighter transport emission standards to finally manage to get lower transport emissions, and what state aid to car industry are we willing to give? And these are questions that, in my view, are not to be taken on the levels of ministers that protect their national industries, but on the level of heads of states and governments. And now the point is that with the COVID crisis, those heads of state and government are very much occupied with completely different topics. Now, there's one opportunity in that from the green agenda point of view is what is circulated a lot, this term of green recovery. So we all know that we are going to get into a significant economic trouble, potentially a significant recession. And the question then is, can an anti-recession program, a recovery, be greened in a way that we achieve the targets that we wanted to achieve and essentially use the crisis as an opportunity? Now, my take on that would be relatively toned down. I think a lot what we see from a lot of scholars is that they are offering existing answers to this new problem, and we talk a lot about programs that have been in on the shelf for a long time. The question is whether this is really addressing the problems that we are seeing with the COVID crisis. I would highlight maybe 4 phases of the COVID recovery that I could see, and where I wonder kind of which instruments and which green instruments would be the right instruments to address them. So the first phase in which we are is hibernation. So we try to essentially freeze our economy to keep the value of existing economic structures. Question is here, how long do we have to do that? What will it cost? Do we do it via grants or via loans? And from a green perspective, the first question is, should we essentially try to keep all our structures that we are currently having, or should we already at this stage of hibernation do some choices on which economic structures we like to keep and which not? For example, think of travel agencies which are suffering. Will they be needed after the crisis? Will they not be needed after the crisis anymore? Second stage is when we get out of the hibernation phase, we probably will want to have a significant kickstart to the economy with typical increase in aggregate demand by public funding. A lot of questions here again. Will we do it with public investments? Will we do it by stimulating private demand? And here the green question again is, do we want to do it in a sectorally targeted way? So do we want to support specific sectors more than others or not? And then that can be greener or less green. After we have spent all this money, this third phase will most likely be fiscal consolidation. We have seen that after earlier crisis. Here we can see whether we can take the money through reducing expenditures or increasing income of the states. And again, the question is, do we do it in a targeted way? So to take the money away from some sectors, from some economic activities, or do we try to do it in a way that minimizes that weight loss and kind of keeps the economy structure untouched? And the final phase is the new world. So what is the new world after COVID going to look like? Some patterns already emerge, new mobility patterns, more automation, shorter supply chains, reshaped international institutions. And if we see that a new world might be upcoming, so does this imply that we already in the first 3 policy phases have to react to that? So what I want to say is there's a lot of interacting choices by policymakers to be made in a very short period of time. We have unfortunately little to no evaluation of the 2008 solutions. So we do not really know whether they were good or bad solutions. And a lot of that will be questions of prioritization. What I'm worried is that making this recovery green essentially means making this recovery more complicated, adding additional challenges to it, and will not make it easier. So it is a tough political sell to go for real green recovery. So the focus will be on recovery and not on green, I presume, on the policymakers' agenda. As Minister Singderson mentioned, there's a risk of more national policies coming in. And we might not get the hard compromises that I spoke about in at the beginning. So just to give an example, there's a significant risk that this will be largely a greenwashing exercise. I just recently got an advert from a government relations agency that proposed to essentially to their clients to make their recovery programs greener and to sell them as greener so that it is easier to get public money. So with all that, final sentences.
You cannot go. You can
single sentence
later, but you did explode the timing.
Okay.
You are half more.
And we have Klaus Dieter with us now, Jean-Michel.
Nevertheless, I have to rephrase what he said because many researchers, Georg, like to ask questions and not to give answers, but on this I agree. And he's adding on the top that the crisis of 2008 doesn't tell us what to do because we have a crisis, sure, but it's not of the same kind. So we will use financial instruments, but only for the starting of the crisis where we are now. But to stimulate demand, to consolidate, to rebuild the industry and the EU economy, we need something else. This something else can be green or very brown or even dark. But we have Klaus Dieter with us. I will repeat, Klaus Dieter is Deputy Director General at DG Energy European Commission. So Klaus Dieter knows many things and has many things in mind. And on the top, I will add, by the way, Klaus Dieter, we will get a German presidency soon. So will it be the miracle we are all expecting? Klaus Dieter.
Sorry, I think we lost him. I think we lost Klaus Dieter. Oh, that was his turn to speak.
That's the mystery of online debates. Do not worry, we won't stay mute because like Georg, I'm a researcher, I can speak for 2 hours not to say anything. I will keep Christian into the fridge because if Klaus Dieter comes, we will have to bundle Klaus Dieter and Christian, but maybe Christian also has to leave. At what time do you leave, Christian?
I have to leave in 15 minutes, I'm sorry.
Okay, so take the floor 2 or 3 minutes and tell us frankly, do you think that the German presidency will find a way to get a general compromise and then we will get a kind of immediate recovery plan? We have it, and long-term rebuilding of the European industry.
Is that for me, Jean-Michel? Christian?
Try to. Because
okay.
you are coming from IEA, so you know how to have this large view, bringing value
you
for
mean to speak comfortably about entirely speculative issues, in other words, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm happy to. No, well, my version of that crystal ball type of phrase is, I think I would put it in this way: I see no other presidency or no other member state better equipped for such a task than Germany because of, shall we say, the mixture of pockets, convening power, and shall we say, leadership potential. So that would be my 5 cents, carefully worded, of course. So that's how I would approach that. I see no one better placed, and I suspect that for a vast many reasons, they would be quite keen to also be seen as taking on that type of role. I think that's what I would offer.
Okay. Do you see electrification of transportation, greening molecule, green gases, sector coupling being put, hydrogen being put in that European compromise and really push kind of new wave of green undertaking everywhere?
Well, I mean, I think it would make sense, yes, to include that in a comprehensive, ambitious type of package. If we were to look at German interests as such, I would think that some of the larger political visions drawing, say, on North Sea or Baltic Sea wind resources, connecting that, shall we say, for broader demand centers in Europe could maybe also be part of it. There's a lot of infrastructure investment and therefore also shovels in the ground and jobs associated with something like that. It is a shared resources model, which I think is fundamentally significant for the future of European energy systems. So I think that could also be added to the list that you had, Jean-Michel. I think that would interest many different stakeholders, not only the German government.
We know that Denmark has been very successful with offshore wind and onshore wind, with wind in general. And we wonder if German industry, Dutch industry, and I know also that in Denmark it is tested to see how we can industrialize more renewable and green gases. But you have to leave, so I do thank you for your participation. And now we are going to explore the last frontier, and the last frontier is on the borders. We may do many things in a more sovereign Europe, Europe being less submitted to international markets decision or international competitiveness constraint, but is it, what kind of border adjustment do we need, and what options are possible, what options are better? By politeness, we will start with Geneviève Pons for Jacques Delors, from Jacques Delors Institute. Jacques Delors Institute is in Berlin, in Paris, and in Brussels. Geneviève, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Do you hear me?
That's your turn, Geneviève.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
We do hear you.
Okay. So I will make an introduction, if you permit.
Please do.
5 minutes introduction. First of all, I have to speak a bit, it's not a long time, about me. So I am leading the Jacques Delors Institute in Brussels. It is the last born of Jacques Delors Institute, and its name is Europe Jacques Delors. It is the last manifestation of long collaboration with Jacques Delors, as I almost started my professional life in his cabinet at the beginning of the 90s as the person in charge of environment. And I was with him in Rio. When I was with him, I chaired the special chef meeting that led to the adoption of a CO2 taxation proposal by the Commission. As you all know, this proposal was never adopted by the Council. And it was the beginning of something that became ETS. You will see that there is a link with what we are telling now, what we are speaking of now. And I was heading WWF European office when we succeeded in making the ETS, the European ETS, much more efficient than it was before. That was the 2017 reform of ETS. When I joined the Jacques Delors Institute, we decided with Pascal Lamy, whom you know, and who has collaborated to this book, we decided to put our two different experiences together, two kind of competences together, and to write on greening trade with the help of Pierre Le Turc. And we have already published 2 papers about that, and the BCA paper is the 3rd one. And this chapter is a preview of the paper we will publish on BCA. Now, what led us to endorse this idea of border carbon adjustment? If we want to reach carbon neutrality by 2050, we will need significant price signals, especially for intensive industries. In the EU, it is this price signal for intensive industries is given by ETS. But if we want to increase the CO2 carbon price for intensive industries, we want also to avoid carbon leakage, because the purpose we pursue is a global one. The purpose you pursue is the one of the Paris Agreement. So we need to avoid carbon leakage. In order to avoid carbon leakage, then we need a border carbon adjustment mechanism. Then I will give you a few features of our proposal, not all of them. So the first one, you have probably guessed it. We propose a parallel system aligned with EU ETS. First point. Second point, we propose a targeted launch on pilot products, electricity and cement. Then we propose to ensure fairness by an independent agency. Fourth, if I am not mistaken, phasing out of free allowances simultaneously. And finally, a 2-year test period for negotiations, necessary exemptions, and adaptations. That's it. Thank you for your attention.
Merci Geneviève, many thanks Geneviève. You have a plan, you know what you want. But we also have Peter, and Peter is like you, high level, or has been high level European civil servant, and has a view when he's working on the topics and so on. So Peter, how do you see the same, which is what to do at the border if we have a very strong internal climate policy?
Well, thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you to Geneviève for that presentation. I had a few slides, but before I present these slides, I will try and reply just very quickly to what Geneviève was suggesting. I don't think that it would be clever of the European Union to introduce a border adjustment mechanism alone. I emphasize, if the EU wants to go it alone, this is not the tool to use. And I'll tell you 3 reasons why. The first is it would require there to be a different monitoring system for carbon emissions, in effect, that would calculate the embodied carbon in goods that are imported into the EU. The production's been somewhere else, but we would be imposing this method on the goods. Now, basically, that is a different method from the UN method. It's a different method to the Paris Agreement, where they just take into account the emissions on the territory where the goods are produced. So what I'm saying is the European Union would be breaking ranks with the rest of the world. And that isn't a good starting point. We would be doing something different. We would be calculating emissions, saying to China, oh yes, we know the Paris Agreement calculates your emissions as being X, but we consider that this steel should be evaluated on the basis of Y. there are two methodologies. That's not a good combination. The other point, political. I don't think the European Union has the guts to stand alone against the rest of the world and impose additional charges on imports of goods that the European Union needs. And we've seen this already happen before for aviation in 2013, where the European Union was trying to levy a carbon charge on incoming flights and outgoing flights to and from the EU. The rest of the world objected very strongly, and there was a threat made that other big third countries wouldn't buy big aircraft, for example, made by Airbus. And what did we do? We stepped back. So I'm yet to be convinced that we will have the political resilience to, especially at this difficult economic time, to do something that is so conflictual with other countries. I don't think the retaliatory measures that other countries might take wouldn't necessarily be on steel or concrete or electricity. It would be on the things that we produce and the high value goods like Airbus, of course, but like cars. And finally, diplomatically, this border adjustment mechanism is saying implicitly to countries that produce goods, and we impose this adjustment on those goods, we're saying to those countries, the nationally determined commitment that you've made under the Paris Agreement isn't good enough. Now that is an incredibly fundamental premise of the Paris Agreement. We agreed that it would be bottom-up architecture where countries make their pledges as to what they can do. And no jurisdiction is supposed to be making judgment on those pledges, but we would in effect be positioning ourselves in such a way as to say, yes, this Indian steel comes into Europe, but India isn't doing enough, so we're going to impose a charge. I mean, this will be a dynamite in the context of the Paris Agreement's further negotiations. And again, the European Union has said we support the Paris Agreement as it is. And of course, I know that Geneviève will be referring to the temperature goals contained within the Paris Agreement, but you have to look at the whole Paris Agreement. And of course, one of the fundamental building blocks is these nationally determined contributions. So I've got a technical reason, a political reason, and a diplomatic reason why this would be unwise for the European Union to do this alone. Fortunately, the Green Deal qualifies and says
you have
WTO compatible.
Left, Peter.
Well, we know, I mean, yes, the Commission has said they would only do this if it was WTO compatible. I mean, I'm not a WTO expert, but I think that is a precondition to us. And more or less, I think that will be a bar that we will not be able to overcome. I leave it there because I give Geneviève, in all fairness, a right to respond. And Jean-Michel, you're chairing this anyway, so please.
So you are not using any slide of any kind?
No, we forget the slides. I mean, they can read the book. They can read the book.
I will not ask immediately Geneviève to answer because you know each other too much. I will ask Georg to say something. Georg, for 1 minute. You are a typical academic like me, so you do not care having two enemies, both Geneviève and Peter, if needed. Georg, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
1 minute.
Yeah, we did a paper at the beginning of this year on carbon border adjustments, and the title of the paper was "Much Pain, Little Gain." So the message is pretty clear. The main point I wanted to make is that when we assess the impacts of past emission pricing systems and past environmental policies, the effect in terms of leakage has been much lower than the political discourse suggests. So if you look through the empirical literature, it's extremely difficult, if at all possible, to find massive amounts of carbon leakage. So we might try to chase a problem that is not as big as the political discourse suggests, and therefore I would side with Peter saying that the technical implementation is complicated, political implementation is complicated, and I would add to that 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 the problem itself is not as big as claimed.
Now, Geneviève, you can jump back or try.
Thank you. Thank you. There are, okay. Okay. It's, I don't know Peter so well, but for a certain time. However, I do not share at all his point of view. The approach we propose, you can read the article, you will see it, is not a conflictual one at all. It is not something to be imposed. We are not crazy. You know, Pascal Lamy has been heading WTO. When you are heading WTO, you know that you do not impose anything to states anywhere in the world. You don't. So it is not the approach we follow. It's a cooperative approach. You know that there are ETS or similar measures in many parts of the world. You have them in Canada, you have them in California, you have them in New Zealand, you have them maybe even more importantly in China, and they look very much like our ETS. Because why? Because we have helped them set up their system. So we have, with many of our main competitors, similar system of CO2 pricing for intensive industries. And the approach we propose is a cooperative one. So we go to them with our idea. And what do we want to achieve finally? It is something that has been very often described as a club. We want to achieve a carbon club, and it will be for third parties which have no carbon pricing to deal with the club. However, let's just keep in mind, it's not something to be imposed, it's something to be negotiated. Second, about carbon leakage. I made the point myself in very difficult circumstances, believe me. When I was heading WWF European office, I went to Business Europe to demonstrate to them that there was no proof of carbon leakage, not at all. And this was a very difficult argument to be made at that time. But what do we want now? We do not want a price of carbon the way it was at that time, which was from 5 to 8 euros per ton. We want something significant that will lead to clever decisions, that will encourage energy transition. So we need a significant carbon price. And what we propose, in addition to the paper which is now published, and given what we have experienced with the CO2 price lately, we propose now to set a minimum carbon price. And with a high carbon price, there is a real risk of carbon leakage. I will not be too affirmative, but it seems that there are already some cases of carbon leakage, and I will not develop unless you want me to do so, because I really want also to not only promote fairness, but also expertise, and so be extremely cautious in all these matters. But please keep in mind, it's a cooperative approach, and with a significant carbon price, then the likelihood of carbon leakages increases significantly. And I will stop here.
Thank you, Geneviève. Now, 10 minutes of interaction with the audience. And your audience is asking several questions. I've grouped 3 of them. The first grouping is fossil fuel are cheapest, even sometimes they are for free for some days or hours. Could we react by a carbon tax to stop this low cost of fossil fuels? Is it an easy policy to set up? And are governments, when so many companies are asking for help, for subsidy, for support, are governments stronger to ask something else to the companies, or are governments so overwhelmed of problems that they will not add any green dimension to the state aids given to everybody? Even only in Germany, as you know, state aid is said 500 billion euro. In France, it is said 300, etc. Who wants to say something about it? Peter, Geneviève, Philippe.
Okay, well, I would say, first of all, that I would be very much in favor of a carbon tax. But I think we've got to ask Geneviève why there isn't one, because the EU has proposed one before. And I think the circumstances, quite simply, haven't changed. We still need all the member states. I'll tell you what has changed since the 1990s is the number of member states in the EU has doubled. So if anything, it's going to be more difficult to get now. But it is, I would just flag that in the European Green Deal, there is a proposal to revisit the Energy Taxation Directive. And that is a very important initiative and to be welcomed. And I think in terms of the emissions trading scheme, I think it does apply a carbon charge on the industry and power generating sectors. I would strongly disagree that we should be trying to engineer there to be a high price. I think we should rather try to ensure the reductions are made by the emissions trading scheme. And if the ambition is to be increased by the current commission, then we can make the emissions trading more stringent. We don't have to say that there should be a certain price. That's what the market's supposed to determine. And to try and set prices or have margins of prices, a floor price and a ceiling price, all of that is intervening in what the market is supposed to be doing. We're looking for reductions. And that's the main deliverable that the emissions trading can provide, and it does provide. But anyway, there was an interesting exchange of letters in the Financial Times within the last month between me and Jorgensen, the former director I had in DG Environment. So, I mean, this does go back to the 1990s. But I mean, the debate is a legitimate one, I fully accept, but I'm not actually in favor of any sort of regulation of prices. But I do believe the emissions trading scheme could become more stringent.
Georg, anything to say? It's not mandatory. If you have nothing to say, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, you asked essentially for crisis policies through energy prices, and essentially one can see very different worlds. One world is where we try to increase the disposable income of households by reducing gasoline and electricity and other prices through the taxation side, and some countries have already done that, and because it's a very easy and direct way of increasing disposable income. On the other hand, it has long-term significant environmental impacts, and I guess everybody here would strongly advise against this, going down that road of reducing energy taxation in order to increase the purchasing power of households in the crisis and beyond. So we should not throw out the long-term baby of climate protection with the bathwater of kind of keeping the economy afloat, but try to use other subsidization mechanisms for poor households. But the question is how easy is it to engineer these handouts to population that are needed to keep aggregate demand high.
Thank you. Geneviève, do you want to react?
Yes. Okay. So I will make 3 points. First of all, to come back to Peter's remark that I know why carbon tax is probably out of reach. Yes, you know that taxes in the EU have to be adopted unanimously, and you can forget about unanimity in the present period even more than in the 90s, where we were not so many member states and not so different from a carbon perspective. So this is not the right approach. Now, 2 remarks. first of all, when oil prices are low or very low, introduction or increases of carbon taxations is easier and even more justified. But this has not necessarily to be made at EU level, and especially not under the form of the unreachable EU carbon tax. Second point, ETS. Yes, ETS has to be more stringent. On this point, at least, we agree. You know that there are sectors who have received free allocations and have started only very recently to be obliged to pay for part of their CO2 allocations. In these sectors, the progress towards energy transition have been much less impressive than in sectors like electricity generation, where they had to pay for their ETS allocations. So you know what? This is the proof that we need a real price and really imposed on intensive industries for the sake of energy transition and probably of their own competitiveness in the future. That's at least a point on which we can agree.
Thank you, Geneviève. I will aggregate 2 or 3 other questions the following way. If I simplify, airlines companies are dead. Lufthansa asked for 10 billion euros to revive, and Air France is asking for 10 billion euros the same to fly again. So if they are dead, why to give them so much money to do the same, which is something which was not very green, something which was not long-term sustainable? Is this a European question, a European policy we have to do together, or is this a national decision? Each country, you have the money, you rescue your company, and your company does what it wants. Peter.
Well, I would say this to with regard to the aviation sector, they are indeed massively impacted by this coronavirus crisis. They will need aid, and the state aid that they receive will have to be scrutinized by the Commission. Even if there are slightly more indulgent rules, there will be some sort of checking. What I think there should be is some conditionalities attached. We can discuss what those might be, but I would be in favor of requiring the airlines to use clean fuels, sustainable aviation fuels, because I know that they're more expensive, but I mean, this is the quid pro quo for the aid that they will be getting. Other people advocate that they should be subject to fuel taxes, kerosene taxes. That's specifically mentioned in the European Green Deal document. Others say the VAT should be applied to tickets, but there are things you can do to green while helping the aviation industry. And indeed, another question that's come up is, what do we do about industry that's, if there's a high carbon price, what is Mr. Viss's proposal to avoid carbon leakage? Mr. Viss's proposal is that the revenues from the emissions trading scheme should be channeled towards innovation by industrial sectors. And the same revenue recycling might be done if taxes are going to be applied. So there are mechanisms where we can help, because I think that the industry does need help. We need to work with them to decarbonize the industrial sectors, because most of the reductions achieved by the emissions trading scheme so far have been rather by the power sector, and very largely due to coal and lignite being replaced by renewable energy over the sort of 15-year timescale that the emissions trading scheme has been in place. That's an achievement, but indeed the industrial sectors will have to decarbonize, and we do have to think of ways of making them do so. And in a way, Geneviève's proposal and my proposal of helping them innovate is, they're aligned in that sense. We've got a problem, we've got to solve it.
Georg, you have 30 seconds and Geneviève will get 10. And then we give the floor. Georg, 30 seconds.
Yeah, just to say that letting the airlines go bankrupt is not going to solve any problem, because the airports and the planes will still be there and they will be used by somebody else. So we should not think that that letting them go bankrupt will solve the environmental problem of aviation.
Geneviève, seconds.
Yes, of course, a conditionality is necessary. At the same time, I remember that I was also heading the state-head meetings, and I remember that in such cases, we act in two times. First time is rescue, and second time is restructuration. So first time is bilateral aids, and second is conditionality. But this has really to be a very, very serious conditionality. And the idea of Peter to link the aid they receive to innovation towards a much greener industry is certainly one that must be supported.
Ladies, gentlemen, we can discuss. I am an academic, we can discuss for years. But at the end of the day, decisions are taken by decision makers. The president of the commission is rather a German lady. The strongest country is Germany, because now UK is not there, so UK does not count for anything. And we have the German presidency coming. So de facto, on the 1st of July, we will see what Europe is able to set up, what Europe is able to define, what Europe is able to implement. And in my knowledge, we won't get a better deal than the one of this second semester. I hope it will be good, but it's not in my command. Susanne will tell us if she can influence more working from Berlin.
Many thanks, Jean-Michel, and many thanks to the entire panel. So virtually giving a round of applause is not an easy thing to do, but I think we all want to give you that round of applause, Jean-Michel. And I'm honestly impressed that the second edition of a book, I have seen all the authors that were in the first edition updating their chapters. I know they are all constrained. I'm very happy, Geneviève, that you could join with Pascal Lamy and make this important contribution to the cross-border carbon mechanism. 46 authors, so you get a little bit of a flavor of what is also in the book. So Ursula von der Leyen has called the Green Deal, when she started, Europe's man on the moon moment. Maybe she should have said Europe's lady on the moon moment. But this is a small detail. So it is so important, as was the Apollo launch in the 60s, according to Ursula von der Leyen. I find this is really creating momentum. And when you talk about men on the moon and these programs, of course, you immediately think about technology and innovation. So I'm very happy now to hand over to Michael Walsh. Michael Walsh is the General Manager of Smart Wires in Europe, based in Dublin, in Ireland. And he was before not only working at IGRID, the TSO in Ireland, but also heading the Irish Wind Energy Association. So you see strong commitment to the energy transition united in the personality of Michael Walsh. And I let him take over on the man on the moon.
Thank you, Suzanne. Very kind. And I agree with you. The person on the moon, we will say. And thank you, Suzanne. I was very interested in the last debate, and it's very hard to live up to very large global topics. And maybe on this time, we will think a little bit more about how to implement it. And I see some of the questions coming through, which hopefully we can pick up on some of those points later on. We're asking around how can we improve innovation, how can we move faster, and what might action look like. And I think we're very lucky to have a wonderful panel of speakers to help us with some of those questions. I'll start maybe with a short personal reflection. And if you move to the next slide, please. This is just something that we pulled together to show how much variety there is in the timeline to adopt new technology. So this slide, it looks at the amount of time it took different utilities in the US, Australia, and Europe to implement a very, very similar project. And in all cases, we start the clock ticking from the moment the utility decides, yes, I actually want to do this project. I have now approved it. And someone has signed up in a form and said, this is a good project. It can then vary from under 1 year to over 6 years to get delivery. And some of the reasons that this happens tend to be just generally clutter in an organization, how busy everyone is. Those of us that have worked in utilities or still do realize every morning you come in, there's maybe 100 things you could work on any given day. And you need to work out which ones are most urgent, which ones does my boss care about, which ones will matter at the end of the year, the end of the decade. And through some process, people decide what to work on day by day. And that does influence, the way people think about that does influence what actually gets done. And I want to come back to that in a second, but I just want to maybe pivot a little bit to where we are in the world at the moment. And if that's where we were last year with that degree of, I suppose, competing priorities in the minds of the people that have to do the work to make all these interesting things happen, what's that now like in the world of COVID, where the uncertainty has even increased, if anything? The people's focus has changed a little bit to be maybe more mindful of health and clean air and environmental concerns. People are maybe more worried about economic outlook, pricing, and people generally are more nervous and have more different emotions in their heads. So I think if we are looking at driving change and policy change in clean air, we should recognize we're doing that in a world where we're competing for people's mental space with an awful lot of other issues. And I think the polls that Suzanne put up at the start were very interesting, and they showed a lot of even divisions. I think one on, the one about the economic impacts or COVID versus the clean energy, it was around 60-40. It was in that sort of range. So I think that's very important. Just coming back to this panel then, we have an awful lot of expertise in the regulatory area. And if I was to say what was the one big difference between the areas where these projects got implemented really quickly and where they took longer, it would be in the area of regulation. And areas where, like the UK, for example, where there is strong output-based regulation and encouragement to do projects quite quickly and deliver an output, we see much faster progress than in other more traditional asset-based types of regulation. And if we look just at the next slide for a second, we see that this year, and with the upcoming German presidency, there is a lot of policy work happening in Europe at the moment. And, we have now the Green New Deal in, and it's highly ambitious. It sets a very clear direction for us as a society. But how we as an industry represent that in the big picture policy blocks and the regulations are going to be very influential to what impact it has. Whether we look back in 5 years' time and say, well, it was a nice statement, but now we have to do more work in the second half of the decade to actually make something happen, or whether we look back with a bit more pride and satisfaction and say, well, once we got the strong political direction and leadership, we were then very clever in how we put that into the specific regulations and measures, and that then led us to be much more innovative, to make use of new technologies as they become available, and to deliver benefits for society, both in terms of cleaner energy and also more economical energy. So in my last slide, before we go to the panel, I'll just share some thoughts that I have about some of the things that I think are important, or some of the lenses to look at as we think of what we want from regulatory policy. And some of them, I suppose, are, firstly, the regulatory practice, it needs to be in line with the energy, climate, and social policy. And I know that maybe sounds very obvious. And the first time someone said it to me, I sort of had, well, of course it should moment. But when you look at the various regulations and legal statutes and objectives, they're not always aligned with what top-level policy is. And I think that's something that we should recognize and really, I suppose, bring back to senior policymakers where we see those things not aligned. The second is transparency. We have an amazing attendance of 300 people on this call, all interested in regulation, European policy, and some of the finest minds in the world and in Europe are thinking about this issue for 2 hours. The more information and data we give to that people, the more ability we have to get brilliant ideas, to get insight and to share it. So transparency, and down to a very granular levels where more people that are interested in helping to solve problems can see what the problem is, what the issue is. And instead of really just wasting time working on an issue that's not important, they have the data to understand how we can do things that overall help us to meet the policy goals. The third area is the incentives and obligations on license holders. By license holders, I mean transmission companies, distribution companies, meter operators, anyone that has one of these licensed monopoly roles in the regulatory business. It's very important that we give them strong incentives based on outputs to deliver value or to achieve these objectives that we believe are important. But also we put obligations in. It's not enough that they can just sit there and for year after year not increase capacity, not connect more renewables, not enable more smart metering. We as policymakers need to create tools and visibility that allow the society to monitor what the progress is against it and to make it important that we actually achieve what's required. I think we need to just be flexible as well about the scenarios. We live in a very uncertain world, and if we try and plan for a very fixed, predicted world, we say, well, this is what the world looks like in 2030, this is what technology is available, this is what consumers are going to want. That's very fragile. And as we look at a policy framework after the EU Green Deal that will be in effect for 5 to 10 years, it's important that it has the flexibility to work in different scenarios as they play out. And lastly, I suppose we can maybe talk on the technology question. It came up once or twice, and understand, look, how do we qualify new technology? At what stage is it something to pilot, and at what stage is it something that we should be quite aggressive with the network companies and expect them to be making wide-scale use of? So I suppose there's quite a bit in all that. I'm really spoiled in that I can ask all these questions and set it up and then hand over to such expert panelists. Konrad Pukala from PSE has sent his apologies. Unfortunately, he will be unable to join us. I was looking forward to hearing his views on these matters. He has a great degree of expertise, but it does give us time to hear the insights from all our other speakers a little bit more. So we had indicated about a 5-minute per speaker. I'll keep an eye on that, but I will give a little bit of flexibility. So Alicia Carrasco, from CEO of Alivio Energy. I know you look an awful lot at strategy and regulation and provide an awful lot of insight to your various partners. Perhaps you'd be so good as to share your thoughts with us and kick off this discussion.
Yes, thank you for your introduction, Michael. My contribution will be based on the chapter I wrote in for the book that is launched today, but it's also going to be framed on the days we are living today. So in the chapter, I was asked to write about disruptive innovation, and I came out with 13 disruptive innovation, which I won't go through all of them, but through 5 of them that I think they are relevant for today. So as we are dealing with the coronavirus, which is a very sad time and a lot of uncertainty, I do happen to believe and to trust that technology development and digitalization would help us to go find the solution that we need to put together solution and willingness to work together. So one of these, the first disruptive innovation I want to talk about is massive, that through the last years of regulatory change and development in Europe, we came out with a current electricity and energy sector, mostly electricity, which does create a lot of a massive amount of information. This is coming from something as basic as a smart metering system. We get the smart metering system in the electricity sector. We have the consumers on board. We can send them price signals that the framework of the clean energy package is putting forward to be sent to consumers. And because of that, we do have a massive amount of information in the electricity sector. How this link with today? Today, we are dealing in Europe with an issue of data, not only of the electricity sector or the energy sector, but also the health sector. And in fact, in February this year, the European Union released the digital strategy, where they wanted to integrate different sectors and make the information of each of the sector interoperable and also among different sectors. And I think this is very important. So we started with a regulation in 2010, talking about smart meters. We got the consumers on board. We have all the capabilities that the consumers can bring to the electricity sector. And this means we have to adapt the grid. We need to adapt the new models to cope with the capacity of the consumers. And we have all this information that is not only to be made interoperable with the electricity sector, but with other sectors. And we are talking about energy space, health space, manufacturing space. So we are talking about 9 sectors that are key to the European Union and to the countries to develop the economy and to become a key front runner on what to do with our data, which I think data is clear that is a massive key issue for our future as the European Union and also as a country and as a industry. So this was the first topic that I wanted to talk, is that the massive amount of information that we have. Then, of course, the second one for my side, and being active on the European Union for several roles in the regulatory area, is that we do have an energy framework and we do have the political leadership. So we have the clean energy package, we have the framework, we have the rules. What we don't have sometimes is the guidelines on how to implement the clean energy package in the countries, because we're starting with different starting points, as to say, and therefore the country's interest on developing in a way or another way, the interpretation on how to implement all the directives and work that the clean energy package leaves there for us is different. But we have a framework and we also have the political leadership. It was with the climate agreement, the Paris Agreement, but now, after we are facing this crisis of coronavirus, we also see many countries, many industry leaders wanted to create a green recovery. We have, before the coronavirus, we already have the Green Deal supporting how digitalization, how electricity is one of the key areas to move the clean recovery and the clean development of the European Union economy. So this is the second point, that we do have an energy framework and the political leadership. It has to be now, with the presidency of Germany, it has to be pushed that the recovery of the coronavirus is based on climate change targets and objectives. Okay, so that's where my 5 minutes, but I have 2 more topics. One is the third one is that cities are shaping our future. So we have seen with Milan, they already proposed to have 35 kilometers indoor in the city that are going to be free of cars, for having more bicycles and more pedestrians walking in the city. And then one other one is industry development. And I think this is, we see that globalization is good for certain things, but not for all. We don't have the basic services that we need right now. There are the development of mass or tests for our health, and for the electricity system, we should secure that we have the technology developed and able to be implemented in Europe. So we think with the Battery Alliance was the first development to support the a basic key for the energy transition, that were the batteries, to be developed in Europe. So in the book, there is a term that I created.
Alicia, can we just get your last point quickly, and we maybe there's some questions on this?
Yes.
You had one more point, I think. You want to just sum up in the next 30 seconds?
No, I think the industry development, it have to be, the energy transition have to be with our industry development.
Okay, Alicia, thank you very much for that. And I'm probably mispronouncing your name as well as interrupting you, so I apologize for that. But Pierre, I know you've also looked at this area quite a bit at Energy, and particularly with a focus on sustainability. Be very interested to hear your reflections over the next 5 minutes.
Sorry, Michael, may I just interrupt you? I think we are very happy that Klaus-Dieter Borchardt is also coming back now, and maybe we can just put him in exceptionally before we continue. That's possible.
Absolutely. you're very welcome, Klaus-Dieter, and look forward to hearing your thoughts. Pierre, we'll take you after Klaus-Dieter.
Exactly. And then Klaus-Dieter, of course, is the first panel, so that was about Green Deal, COVID, and yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Susanna, and I apologize. First, I had some technical problems here in the whole day already with my equipment, and then I had other meeting, so I'm back. And but when I managed, just before I had to leave again, I heard something. I do not remember who it was, but saying that the recovery plan cannot go hand in hand with a Green Deal. And so I think that was my understanding of the message. And here I must say that I'm of a completely different view. I would even turn it around and saying that the recovery plan must go hand in hand with a Green Deal. And we also here in the Commission, we see a huge potential also to combine these two things, especially if we concentrate not only on the Green Deal, but also on the digital agenda. And these are the two major areas that we have to bring together in order to not only make the transition to an integrated energy system that responds to the necessities under the Paris Agreement, but also that responds now to what is needed in the aftermath of the COVID-19 crisis to push up again economy and here growth and jobs. We truly believe that the European energy system integration, where we for the first time now are looking at a much more integrated and dynamic interaction between suppliers, energy grids, and end customers across the different energy markets, is the way where we can see a lot of benefits. And these benefits, of course, when we are talking about the recovery plan, have to come in a short-term way, and then, of course, in a longer-term way. Short-term, here we see a huge potential also on investing in technologies that are already mature enough. We could refer to, of course, the renewable technology. We can also refer to the necessary preparation of our grid in order to make them ready to take in more and more offshore wind. We can look into the investments that have to take place now when we talk about green hydrogen in the scale-up of electrolyzers. We can talk about investments in the technology CCUS and pyrolyzers when we talk about the blue hydrogen. And the earlier we get all this, the better, because then we also have the chances to move earlier from natural gas to decarbonized natural gas. So for us, there are a number of possibilities in the energy efficiency part, the building renovation wave that we are preparing. Here is another area where we can do something. We can also now go straight into the end consumer side and put money there where the industry is willing to invest in those areas and those processes, changing processes to a greener future. So transport is the same. And here, if we can accelerate certain processes through dedicated support and investment, that is what we would like to try also in the short term, and then in the longer term anyway. We have huge needs for investment in the energy sector. And all these, what we have already said right from the beginning, that we see also in the energy sector under the Green Deal, that this will become Europe's new growth strategy. And why should we give up on this idea? And unfortunately, I couldn't listen to everything what was said against this idea, but I really still believe that we have to try not to give up because of the COVID-19 crisis on the Green Deal, on the transformation of our energy system away from the vertical energy value chains to horizontal energy value chain with all what I've said. And this is also what is behind the recovery plan that the Commission is currently in parallel with the new proposal on the MFF, multi-financial framework, is developing. Here we are setting or putting in place instruments that will help us. A call in July for the first projects under the Horizon Europe Fund. Under the MFF, there will be a special financial or instrument for market finance for crisis-related purposes. And there will be another initiative that would also look into the repairing of the economy, so a bit longer term. So we will shuffle a bit the priorities under the MFF and aligning it also with a recovery plan, and both can go together. And when you will read on the 24th of June our communication on the energy system integration, I think you will understand better what I mean and why I'm saying this here today, because there you will find the whole outline of the main streams that we are pursuing with regard to how to manage the transition towards a more dynamic interaction within the horizontal supply chain. And there are a lot of ideas and possible actions, also short-term and not only long-term, which we really want to develop now. And for us, the COVID-19 crisis is not hampering. It should even reinforce the need and necessity to work on this new energy system. What else can I add? The importance that we are attaching to this communication, you can also see that the date for the publication has not been moved. It is still the 24th of June. It is for the energy, our flagship communication under the Green Deal, and it will now be bundled with a recovery plan and a new proposal of the MFF. Altogether, I think energy can play a good role here also, not only with regard to get it right within an integrated energy system, but also to get it right with regard of our contribution to the recovery of the European economy. I think I stop here because you are a bit late already in your program.
Klaus-Dieter, thank you so much for joining us. We're delighted that we got the chance to hear your views, and we were talking about the need for flexibility in some of our scheduling and being able to respond to different scenarios as they play out. So that was part of our introduction, and I think we applaud you for making us actually put it into practice so quickly. So we saw how much value we get from listening. I hope that you're able to listen to the rest of the conversation, and if you are, and we do have any questions, hopefully we get to sum up. But if you don't mind, I might move on to our next speaker now, so that we can aim to finish on time. So Pierre, I had just introduced you, and we were looking forward to hearing your views on the regulatory framework and sustainability. So please, Pierre, I'd be fascinated to hear your views over the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for this invitation. I will mainly share my thoughts and remarks about innovation and the way we can support innovation in Europe, because this is the thing I know the best. But before, I would like maybe to present you InnoEnergy, because I'm not completely sure you all know InnoEnergy. So basically, InnoEnergy is a public-private partnership. We are supported by the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, which is under Horizon 2020 and soon Horizon Europe. And basically, our mission is to accelerate the market uptake of innovations in sustainable energy across Europe. I'm going to make it short, but basically, we have 250 people working at InnoEnergy, and our main activity is to foster entrepreneurship and to accelerate early stage ventures and innovation projects in the field of energy. So far, we have invested around 250 million euros in innovation projects, and we have currently around 200 early stage ventures or startups in the field of energy in our portfolio, which means that our job is to help them develop their business across Europe or even beyond by trying to provide them all the services they could require to develop their company. So few elements about innovation and the support of innovation in Europe. First, I would like to emphasize the fact that innovation is not only about technology. Of course, technology is a key element of innovation, but we should also look at other dimensions around a company or how to put innovation on the market. Things like human capital, for instance, is very crucial. The other element I would like to emphasize is that it's really vital to have a good ability to innovate in Europe for companies and for societies at large, especially for the energy transition. And two key ingredients, in my view, for that, to be able to foster innovation in Europe, are to have a good entrepreneurial culture or entrepreneurial mindset in companies, and to be able to leverage ecosystems. It's clear for ventures that this is their main asset, to be able to have a good team and a network to leverage, but it's also something that large companies are trying to develop more and more, and especially working with the venture world, I would say, especially in the field of energy, of course. So you have more and more large companies developing collaborations with smaller and younger companies, and I think one of the merit of working with say more agile companies is also to develop within your company the ability to have entrepreneurial mindset and a new way of working. And I would say, if you look at the public side of things, there are several levers that the EU could use to foster innovation in Europe, but I will just mention two of them. One has actually been mentioned by Alicia just before. It's the political support and the ecosystem development. And she used the example of the European Battery Alliance. And I wanted to also to use this example because, in my view, it's really essential to have well-structured ecosystems across Europe for specific strategic value chains. And I think it really contributes to innovation. I'm not saying that the European Battery Alliance is in fact a success today. We're going to see it in a few years. We need to see whether we have been able to develop the manufacturing capacity in Europe for this industry. But one thing is sure is that it created a real momentum thanks to this political push from the Vice President Šefčovič. It created a momentum and it gave confidence to investors and to industry to say that we could catch up Asian players, for instance. And so this is something which is crucial and that we need to replicate in other sectors, in other strategic value chains. And the other one is obviously the set of instruments we have, of funding schemes and instruments all along the innovation value chain. I think it's specifically crucial for the field of energy because energy is not a very well-suited sector to be supported by venture capital for three main reasons, I would say. Because first, it's very regulated, so it could be a kind of, it can be seen by investors as a source of uncertainty in the future, because it's usually capex intensive. And the third reason is because you have very long innovation cycles, which are longer than the lifetime of VC funds. So it's good to have a full set of instruments, but it's really important to have a good connection between the different instruments to make sure that there is not too much complexity in this ecosystem for SMEs. And finally, I would like just to conclude with 4 key messages that are related to the current crisis. The first one is, I think, as Klaus Dieter said, it's really key to put the Green Deal at the core of the recovery. It's essential. We don't have the luxury to delay our action. Second, and for the same reason, I would say we should strengthen innovation policies for energy and climate. And for instance, we could increase the budget of our Horizon Europe in next MFF, and especially the 3rd pillar. Then I think we should make sure that we well align the innovation policy and the industrial strategy to make sure that we have the right instruments connected to the right value chains. And finally, this is, I think, a very important thing. We've seen, because of the crisis, a lot of ventures and SMEs in the field of sustainable energy that are at risk, and they are not necessarily able to get benefit from the measures implemented by the member states because they are not credit worthy. And if we don't rescue them, in a way, we are jeopardizing our technological sovereignty for decarbonization. So I would say it's something really essential as well, is to rescue these SMEs and ventures in the field of decarbonization. Otherwise, no more autonomy and no more technological sovereignty.
Okay, thank you very much, Pierre. That was fascinating and a very topical comment to end on, and I think it links very well to broader policy discussion that we're going to be having over the rest of this year. Pierre, I'm going to move on now to Olivier. Olivier, you're CEO of Tomorrow, and I talked quite a bit in my introduction about the area of transparency, and I have to say I had the privilege of seeing your app being demoed in Copenhagen last year, so I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this subject.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the introduction and for inviting me here. So I'm going to set a little bit the scene. So I represent Tomorrow, a small startup based in Copenhagen that was founded 4 years ago. And our mission is to get the world to understand and reduce their carbon footprint. And if we really set the challenge that we're facing, 80% of the world's energy comes from fossil fuels, which of course we need to get rid of by 2050 if we want to get a chance to follow the Paris Agreement. And therefore, the solutions that are often brought up are electrification in general of the world, having electric planes, electric cars, electric heating, electric everything. And this is why the first product we came up with is an app called Electricity Map. And what this does is that in real time, it showcases how clean the electricity from the grid where you're located in is. And we get all this data by connecting to various TSOs and transparency platforms. For example, in Europe, we'd connect to the NSUE transparency platform to get data from there. And then based on that, we can compute what is the origin of the electricity and how much that electricity emits of carbon if you were to charge your electric vehicle at a given time. And this is why transparency is so incredibly important. It is because it is the cornerstone of our technology in terms of both credibility, because anyone can look under the hood on what we've done because it's open sourced. And on the other hand, this also enables scalability of the technology and uptake of innovation. I'm going to give one key example of how Electricity Map is, for me, a prime example of how open source and transparency really gets that scalability effect. So in the first days of Tomorrow, so 4 years ago, Electricity Map only had a couple of countries on its map. I think we had Germany, Spain, France, and Denmark. And because this map is open source, we had a call to action. Any visitor that came to the map knew about open data that was available somewhere in the world, could contribute to the platform by writing a little bit of a piece of code that would fetch that data into a standardized format and then add it to the platform. And this is how, over the years, we've been able to, in a very scalable manner, add a lot of countries to Electricity Map, which now have been generalized to Northern America. We have Latin America, we have Australia as well. We're adding parts of India. And this is really how you get, this amazing scalability and information, which is so drastically needed if you want to achieve carbon reductions at a global scale and a rapid take. So this is not only about informing citizens, policymakers, and business leaders. It's also about enabling companies to optimize their carbon footprint. And as I said before, as we're electrifying the whole world, What is needed in this electrification process is to optimize. And typically, if you end up charging your electric vehicle with electricity that has been produced with coal or gas, unfortunately, you're not as efficient as if you were using electricity generated by low carbon nuclear or by renewables, for example. And the thing to realize, of course, when the wind blows or the sun shines, you can use that electricity, but if the wind doesn't blow and the wind doesn't, if the sun doesn't shine, then that is not a good time. And so we've built systems that allow to predict 24 hours ahead, what is the electricity mix going to be? What are the carbon emissions going to be? And then you can decide to optimize your electricity usage based on that information. And we were in that effect very proud to announce last week a global partnership with Google, where we are helping them optimize their data centers based on the carbon content of the grids. And to give a little bit more background to that story, what is happening in the data centers is that most computations or some computations are flexible and can be shifted in time. They are flexible. Those computations would be, for example, the recommendations algorithms on YouTube. They need to be trained. They can be trained during the night. They can be trained during the day, but there's some amount of flexibility. That flexibility can be leveraged to reduce emissions if you start shifting the load from high carbon hours to low carbon hours. So this is something we're actively doing with the electricity map. Another product that we started working on, and it is a work in progress, which you can download right away if you wish, is a product called North. And this one doesn't look only at electricity, but it looks at all verticals. And the point of this application is to explain you as a person, as a citizen, where does your personal carbon footprint comes from? And again, we're reusing all those scalable open source pillars in our strategy. So the way it works is that we're connecting to services you already use. For example, if you have a smart meter at home, the app would connect to your smart meter, and we would use the electricity map to tell you, hey, this is a good time to use electricity. This is a good time to charge your electric vehicle. We're going further than electricity, and we're also looking at, for example, your transportation. You can connect the Uber app, and as soon as you book a taxi, it goes into the app. You can connect also your
Olivier, would you mind maybe just summing up your thoughts in the next 30 seconds or so, please?
Absolutely, that was the plan. So you can connect to a lot of various services there, and I think actually I'll just close here by having one remark about our vision into how to scale innovation is really through transparency and open source, and maybe those are subjects that will come up later in the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Olivier, and apologies for cutting you short. We have we've such a great panel and so much to discuss, and I'm looking at the questions as they come in, and we'll see if we've time to get to some of those. But Thomas, fascinated to hear your reflections on all this, and maybe any sum up you have on what you've heard already. For those that are listening, Thomas is Director of the Energy Centre at the Jacques Delors Institute. So Thomas, thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to hearing your thoughts over the next 5 minutes.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for the fascinating discussion we're having today. I think it's important that in this crisis moment, we take a step back. We are currently engaged in what is arguably the first energy transition in human history. At least that's what we're doing in the European continent since 2006, as we consume less energy almost every year. And an increasing amount of this energy is coming from other things than fossil fuels, mostly renewables. And this is already a process of massive innovation on a scale that we've rarely seen throughout European history. And so here what we're transforming is really a system, and a system in a way is something like a puzzle. The energy system is a big puzzle with a lot of pieces, and those pieces, each of those pieces are moving, and the architecture of the puzzle is also moving. One way to look at this puzzle, rather than looking at energy sources, one maybe more innovative way to look at it is to look at this puzzle as a puzzle with 5 big pieces. One is technology, another one is infrastructure, a third one is economic incentives, a fourth one are social norms, and a fifth one are routines. So the technology here is just really one piece of the puzzle. It can be a decisive piece of the puzzle in some areas, but it can be also a piece that is not that relevant. In a way, we need to do a lot of innovation also in areas where the technology already exists. We did innovation in business model, in behaviors. The app that Olivier presented is actually one way to trigger some behavioral change of consumers and companies. So here, the public policy challenge really is to act on those 5 elements, to act at the same time on those elements, while those pieces are also changing as a result of things that are not really managed by public policy. For instance, the economic incentives, whether you opt for renewables or energy efficiency or burning oil for heating, the economic incentives have drastically changed over the past few months. The same goes about the social norm. Who knows what's going to be the social norm about tourism in 1 or 2 years? Will it be considered to be okay for people to go like several times a year using an airplane on a holiday at the other side of the world? Or will we as a society consider that to be bad behavior because we know that it is a factor that increased the speed of the pandemic of COVID-19 that we are suffering from? And so we see that those pieces are changing even during the crisis. Alicia talked about the city of Milan's decision. In a way, this can be looked as an innovation in terms of infrastructure. You take pieces of infrastructure that were dedicated to cars and you dedicate it to cycling and walking, and this allows for a new way of moving around in a given city. So to end this, I just want to first fully subscribe with what Pierre Sakin said in terms of public policy ask, and I would like to add just three small elements. The first one is that if we want to have a transition, we need innovation, and if we want innovation in the end, we need public support for innovation, and that also requires money. And now, as part of the Green Recovery Program, but also the debates on the EU budget, we're discussing about Horizon Europe, which is really the main tool the EU has in order to financially support research and innovation. And what is interesting is that before the crisis, the national governments that are at the European Council wanted to cut research and innovation. That was their willingness. They wanted Europe to spend less on research and innovation compared to what the European Commission proposed. I don't know what will be the impact of COVID-19, but I would be very puzzled, if I may say so, if I see that the next few budgets invest less in research and innovation, especially as we see that research and innovation is crucial not only in our sectors, but also in order to fight public health crisis like the one we are experiencing. So here, a concrete, simple ask would be to invest at least 120 billion euros on research innovation. So that's even more than what the Commission is actually proposing, and that is the position of the European Parliament, which I believe to be, let's say, on the better side of history on that front. The second thing is the ETS Innovation Fund. So a question on that. If we don't do anything, the ETS Innovation Fund will invest less in innovation for one simple reason: the revenues of the Innovation Fund are deriving from the ETS. So if you have a smaller carbon price, you have less money going to the Innovation Fund. So we need also a public policy action, for instance, as part of the Green Recovery, to ensure that we use this Innovation Fund that exists, that can invest money in the coming years to projects that are good for the economy and that are good for the transition. And finally, we also need regulation. We need ambitious regulation to promote and sometimes even oblige companies to innovate, especially the ones that are the least innovative. And there is this idea in Brussels sometimes that regulation is the enemy of innovation. That's not true at all. When you look at history and the facts, you see that regulation is the friend of innovation. Obviously not stupid regulations, but smart, ambitious, forward-looking, green regulation can be very, very important to drive innovation. And that's what we have seen, especially for car manufacturers. Like 10 years ago,
Thomas, I think you've done a great job in wrapping it up. And I think, I let you run an extra minute or two at the end because you're doing part of my job before before we get down into another example, I might just thank you for doing that. I agree completely with you about the need, your final point on using innovation to drive, or the importance of regulation innovation. I'd like to just thank all the contributors and speakers. I think I've never heard so much content and ideas in 30 minutes in my life before, and my head is sore and my arm is sore from trying to capture them. From Alicia starting us off about the visibility of data, talking through Olivier and Pierre reflecting on the need for entrepreneurs, for societal reaction, for public support, various different technologies. It's been a fascinating amount of topics, and I think there's material for a full conference here. I've been looking at Q&A, and unfortunately we're not going to be able to go and really analyze all the questions, but just to acknowledge them. We had a lot of questions around the role of the ETS Innovation Fund, which I think, Thomas, you had covered very well. We have a lot of questions in the area of sector coupling, how heat, transport, how all of this is going to play together, what innovations might be needed, how is that going to translate problems from one sector into another. Questions about the role of financial institutions and how they look at their CSR metrics. So I think all of those just point to how interconnected all of this is. It's not just a matter of one single aspect and you solve one problem. To me, I suppose the theme of all this is the need for even more collaboration. And Suzanne, I think it points to the importance of your book and the work of the Florence School of Regulation in helping us all to think together and to bring all these various different aspects in our thinking. I would have loved to have had a lot longer to explore all these ideas and follow up on the questions. But I want to just thank everyone both for speaking and ask everyone else, maybe give them a virtual round of applause, and also to thank those people that made comments and questions. They did add a lot of value to the insights. They have all been captured, and we'll follow up offline with those. So thank you, everybody. And I'll hand back now to Suzanne and Daniela.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, panel, for this interesting contribution. I'm very happy now to introduce the former Director General, Philip Lowe. Philip has been writing the first chapter in the first edition, and an update of this edition has been presenting many circumstances. Today also a consultant with Auxerra, and I don't think you can find someone better to tell you in, Philip, I think in 8 minutes or 7 minutes, what is the win-win on the deal that we hope to see emerge between the EU and UK. And don't forget, there's also a lot of Irish people in the virtual room.
Hopefully less. Thank you very much.
To understand. Thank you, Philip. Philip?
Oh, maybe we lost him. Yes. I think we lost him, unfortunately. I'll try to... he's coming back.
Okay.
Hello, sorry, Susanna, there was a break in transmission there. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you very much for the previous two panels. I must say I feel a bit ashamed to have to address the subject of Brexit when we're in the middle of a much larger crisis and with huge implications, both economically and socially. If I can say something about those before I come to Brexit, I'd just like to say that compared with the questions which you put on the screen, I mean, frankly, there are going to be substantial longer term impacts of this present crisis on the economy beyond the immediate confinement effects, and particularly in areas where collective action and mobility are concerned. And therefore, we have to take account of those in whatever policies we're developing. Secondly, that clearly implies that in designing the transition, we've got to take some messages from what's happening, whether it's in terms of the strategies of companies, the behavior of people, and indeed the regulation which is put into place. Certainly 6 months ago, one would have put a lot more emphasis on public transport systems than we do than politicians and others are doing today. But certainly we Brexit, if there is a relaunch to be applied, it must surely profit the and the activity which is coming through the Green Deal and other initiatives at national level. And from that point of view, worth emphasizing that so why the fundamental objectives in our climate strategies on the one hand and our energy strategies in Europe on the other hand should be called into doubt by the present crisis. Indeed, as far as the energy strategies are concerned, more integration, more interconnection will allow us more flexibility and more adaptability in relation to crises. And as far as climate change is concerned, it is inevitable that whatever the mix, whether they to change, it is not simply a low oil price which should determine our future. It is working out what is going to be in the long term the most sustainable economic systems we can put in place. Now, as far as Brexit is concerned, I'm going to give you the headlines, which you already have from the press. We had an original draft agreement, withdrawal agreement, and a political declaration, which was subsequently changed somewhat by the new government under Boris Johnson in the UK and agreed by the EU. The changes as they affected energy were not immediately substantial in terms of the texts, but clearly the carve out for Northern Ireland has been more explicit, and the explicit mention of the preservation of a single wholesale electricity market in Ireland has been a point to be retained. At the same time, there's a significant lack of mention in the new texts of any substantial degree of regulatory alignment, and certainly no commitment to any common rules on state aid and other things, as was originally implied by the first draft political declaration. Now, all of us around the table, wherever the table is, I'm not quite sure it is, know that there was substantial alignment between the European Union's energy and climate policies and those of the UK. Indeed, the UK was very much an advocate of certain aspects of those two policies and went beyond them, and has gone beyond them, for example, in the area of carbon taxation, which Geneviève and Peter have been eloquently discussing originally. So there's going to be an absence from the table of contributor to the debate, which arguably has made some degree of, has advanced the EU's position. And at the same time, the UK and its institutions have participated significantly in the integration of electricity and gas markets in Europe. The UK has become a major importer of gas like everyone else. It has the same strategic interests as far as gas is concerned as most other countries in Europe now. Although they came late on the stage, interconnection in the last few years has become a subject which is recognized even positively by ministers, even in the present government. At the same time, if you read the texts of the agreements and you read the statements which are made, you can only come to the conclusion that distancing from EU institutions and agencies is a major fundament of the approach of the UK government at the present time, and will go on being. The fact that in the climate change area, there is complete disassociation of the UK from the EU ETS, except for the commitments made in 2019 and 2020, is one aspect. But in the area of market integration, and particularly in electricity, market coupling, it's interesting to see that there is, in fact, the only drafting which would point, which is positive in what's being discussed, more or less says, well, we'll have a good dialogue and we'll have good information exchange.
Philip?
Philip, I think
By
we have a concern, and unfortunately, we also have to come to an end in 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah, Chris Listen talked earlier on behalf of ACER. One would have thought that if there was any genuine commitment to profiting from market integration in Europe, one would have seen ACER mentioned as one of the agencies which there should be clear dialogue with. So no action in what's proposed, a lot of missed opportunity. On the UK side, definitely doctrine dominates growth. On the UK side, that is, and on the EU side, I would simply say that maybe if we're going to improve on the present situation, or the situation which will occur after the end of 2020, then perhaps some degree of pragmatism on the kind of separate agreements we might have might bring us back to a situation of profiting from the integration which had already been started. So that's it. Thank you.
Many, many thanks, Philippe. And we have already nearly come to the end. I liked your tone of optimism as much as I think also Klaus-Dieter Beucher. We had this poll in the beginning of today's discussion that was also shedding light on many concerns. And now I think we end this discussion with a positive tone and a lot of hope. Here we see the poll results again. So I think it's interesting to consider those. And since the situation is very dynamic, of course, we have time to adapt to what's coming. But let's not give up on the European acquis. And I think as Jacques Delors has been putting this, the positive vision that is in the energy transition is so central that we shouldn't give up on it. So I would like to thank all the speakers. I would like to thank all the participants for participating today, and encourage you to read the book. There's many more chapters and many more insights, and it's really, I would say, up to date. I hand over to Daniela, not without thanking Florence School of Regulation, Jean-Michel, Daniela, the great team that makes it in these days where meetings are not possible, with an offer that is absolutely outstanding. Daniela.
Thank you, Suzanne. So we have more online events coming up. So check our website and subscribe to our newsletter. The next two are this Wednesday and Thursday. You can find more information on the website. So basically, we're the conclusions of the Copenhagen Forum 2019, where the Commission asked the Copenhagen School of Energy and Infrastructure and the Florence School of Regulation to organize 2 roundtables. So of course, we are now organizing them online. And there are 2 open consultations that you can read and give us your comments. And on Wednesday and Thursday this week, we will go online and discuss with the different experts on these consultations. And thank you very much to these incredible panelists and to all the 300 people online with us here on Zoom, and also the 30 people live on YouTube and also on Twitter. It has been amazing. Last year we were in Brussels for the first edition of the book with around 50 people, and now online we are more than 300. So there are good things to it. Thank you so much, Suzanne. And I will send an email to all the attendees with more details on the book, on the course, and we'll be in touch. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.